Hello and welcome to Unspun Live, the Herald's politics podcast. I'm Andy Raymond, political editor of the Herald. Today I'm coming to you live from Aberdeen Beach. You can maybe just about hear the waves. It's quite flat here. You can just hear them. We are lapping against the shore. You can probably hear the seagulls. Anyway, I'm here because Nigel Farage is here. He is about to make a speech about the deindustrialisation of Britain from a fairly fancy restaurant just down the road there. He's also here because Reform are confident that they can do well at the Holyrood elections in the north.
So that's how this week's podcast was supposed to start. But then we went to the Nigel Farage press conference and things got weird.
Thank you. Now, the Herald. Now, Andrew Learmouth, it seems that you're involved with this group of protesters outside.
No.
Well, it's funny, isn't it, that you come and your newspaper also manages to have another one of your correspondents as a protest correspondent. So you knew more about this than we did.
That's not true at all, Nigel. Sorry.
Really?
Absolutely not. So we have two reporters in Aberdeen.
Well, thank you.
Come on now.
And they're both here. Very good.
I've got two reporters going to Hamilton today as well.
You must have so much money and so many staff. It must be remarkable. Do carry on.
Just to be clear, we've got a couple of reporters here as well.
Have you?
Right.
Well, no.
Absolutely.
Well, no, fair enough. If you say that, I believe you.
I don't know that you do believe me, but I didn't. But I don't know what I was going to ask. Yeah, well, let's talk about the protest.
Well, this location was only sent to you guys. It wasn't put out on the public wires. We didn't put it out to our membership, and yet they knew. So it came from one of you.
Well, people were tweeting about it. Oh, well, it's not.
Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Well, let's talk about the protest, because I'm not entirely clear what you were accusing John Swinney of earlier when you talked about him inciting or his insightful language. What, are you saying that he's putting you at risk or something? What's?
Well, he used the racist word, didn't he? You know, despite the fact, as I've pointed out, we have many members from all communities, some of whom are in very senior positions within our party. According to the experts, we got more BAME, if you believe in all this, more BAME voters in the last general election than the Liberal Democrats, and we get even more this time. We just want to live in a country where everybody is treated equally, everybody is treated on merit, regardless of race, sexual preference, or whatever else it may be. And as for outside, well, you know.
Yeah, so here's the video I put out on social media straight after.
Well, that was weird. Nigel Farage just accused me of colluding with protesters in Aberdeen to derail his speech. I didn't. I wouldn't, of course. There are a few reasons why I wouldn't. First, I'm a reporter. It's not my job to engineer the news. It's to report it. Second, it's about trust. If politicians, parties or organisations share information with me, especially if they're concerned about protests, they do so expecting professionalism. If I broke that trust, they'd stop telling me things. And if they stop telling me things, I can't do my job. And third, it's about integrity. That's all we have, really. As journalists, if we lose that, we lose everything. So, no, Nigel, I didn't tip anyone off. I just turned up to report the story, same as always.
And then what happened was he was supposed to be in Hamilton doing a walkabout with media, but he ditched the Scottish press pack. He blamed us, still blames us, and then just left all these poor, bedraggled Scottish journalists hanging about in the car park of the Premier Inn Hotel in Hamilton. Rebecca McCurdy and Kathleen Nutt were there for the Herald. Here's their take.
It's been a bit of a frustrating day, Kathleen. We've been here waiting for Nigel Farage, but no show.
No show. It has really been frustrating. I arrived in Hamilton with Colin Men's photographer about 12 o'clock to speak to some voters, and then we were told by the party registered last night to come here for about 2 o'clock, thinking that Nigel Farage would be here for a walk around in the town to meet voters, speak to the press, to be quizzed by us. But it got to about, was it 3:30, and there was no show.
Yeah, it became pretty obvious that he wasn't coming.
Yeah.
We were told he went to Lark Hall. He was in the pub having a pint and having some cigarettes.
Being filmed by the BBC, but no other journalists were
was
present.
Told where he was, and actually we were told repeatedly that he was still coming and we should wait, and then then at the last minute we were told he was actually in the office. It's just been a bit of a
It's been a messy day. It's been frustrating. We were told that actually he was at the last minute in Hamilton at the Reform Office at the top of the town. So we all raced up there, which is about a 10-minute walk away. And apparently he had just been there and had just left. So we sadly didn't see Nigel Farage or Richard Tice. And there was at that point some protests outside the Reform Office and some counter-protests. So there were anti-racist protests, but also then a counter-protest by Reform supporters as well, and began to get quite shouty, but didn't really come to anything like violence, thankfully.
Yeah, and then obviously we have the by-election on Thursday, so we were expecting Nigel Farage to do a bit of a walkabout, have a wee bit of interaction with some locals here, but that didn't happen.
The by-election is this week, and the only thing we know for certain, as Professor Sir John Curtis said on the radio earlier, is that the winner will probably win with a very small majority, and they'll win with a third of the vote. So it's going to be an interesting one. You know, how significant it is, what the implications are. We'll talk about that in next week's podcast. We'll have all the news, results, analysis, interviews, everything will be there. We'll have a bit of a special one. But let's turn to something completely different now. Last week I sat down with Monica Lennon, the Labour MSP, who is trying to introduce the new crime of ecocide into the statute books. I started off by asking her what her new bill, her Ecocide Bill, would do.
So really what it's about is taking action to criminalise severe environmental harm. People are quite shocked when they find out that ecocide isn't already a crime, and many countries have taken action to update their law. So there's a risk now that Scotland falls behind. So I've been working on this bill for 4 and a bit years, working with lots of really amazing people outside of Parliament who have real knowledge of this and expertise, but then speaking to frontline workers who are often the first responders when there's a wildfire or a serious flood event. I'm speaking to scientists who work in SEPA to find out more about their job, understanding the role of the police as well, because environmental crime is one of the fastest growing crimes in Europe, and there's a really nasty element to that as well with organised crime gangs. So what the bill is trying to do is recognise that ecocide events do occur across the world, and we need to have something in our law that helps to deter that. But if they do happen, that we've got really tough penalties. So it's criminal law. We do have lots of regulation already in Scotland, but the research that I've undertaken and the consultation that's been done shows that it's not really providing that deterrent, and it's not really being used properly. So the Regulatory Reform Act, for example, of 2014, over a 10-year period, there's been no convictions under Section 40, which is worrying. But the ecocide law is about saying if there's severe environmental harm that's widespread or long-term or irreversible impact, and there's been intentional or reckless conduct, then the high-level decision makers or executives in a company or an organisation would be held to account. And I suppose what's really different about this proposal compared to other law that we have in Scotland is the penalties really quite severe.
What sort of penalties are you talking about?
Yeah, so for individuals on conviction, up to 20 years in prison. Obviously that would be for the courts to decide what that level should be for any particular case, and there could be an unlimited fine as well. For organisations, again, unlimited fines, and there's measures in the bill which probably haven't been talked about as much as the prison part of it, but part of it is around a compensation order. So upon conviction, it's thinking about who are the victims here in terms of individuals, so members of the public, communities. So it's about a route to compensation for the victims of ecocide, and also the cleanup costs, because when severe damage happens like that to the environment, there could be massive costs to the public finances in terms of cleaning up what's been left behind and trying to deal with maybe very sort of toxic circumstances.
So what are we talking about actually? When you talked about severe environmental harm, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so people always ask for examples. So I'm always a little bit reluctant to say, well, this was ecocide, because you know, don't want all the lawyers coming on to me. But there's been in sort of more general terms, people give some of the maybe more international examples that are easier to visualize, like deforestation. So we're seeing like destruction in the Amazon. And then in the marine environment, there's a lot of concern about dredging and just about the impact on marine ecosystems. So there's going to be a big debate, I think, around that. There's been obviously historical events that have led to massive oil spills in our oceans and rivers. And again, it's looking at some of these industrial events that perhaps could have been prevented. So what we're trying to do with ecocide law is to change behaviours at the highest level. This is not about telling people to be more vigilant with their recycling and, you know, stop using single-use plastic, although we should minimise our single-use plastic. This is about, you know, powerful corporations and other big players, people who have power, who make big decisions, often motivated by profit. It's about saying, if you continue to behave in a certain way that could lead to ecocides happening, then there's going to be a risk to your reputation, because you could be accused of ecocide, you could be convicted of ecocides, you could lose your freedom, you could be in jail for a long time, you know, basically all your money could be taken off you, and there's publicity ordered mechanisms available to court. So basically, you know, there's a huge amount of stigma around ecocide. What's reassuring for me is that as the member pushing this, we're not the first to do this in Scotland. So the EU has already passed an environmental crime directive, and what that now requires individual members of the EU to do is have their own domestic legislation. It's all a bit clunky the way it's worded, but basically they talk about crimes comparable to ecocide. So again, we're talking about severe environmental harm with that widespread or long-term or irreversible impact. So by May of 2026, just as we're probably going to the polls for the Scottish Parliament election, all the members of the EU will have their own legislation domestically. There's a few examples already, including Belgium. And I think our bill at the moment is probably quite similar to the example in Belgium. And then separately from that, because the initial campaign and goal was for ecocide to be an international crime. And I mentioned Polly Higgins today in First Minister's Questions when I was in the chamber. So Polly was a Scottish environmentalist. She was a lawyer, and she sadly died in 2019. But for maybe the last 10, 12 years of her life, she dedicated herself to advocating for ecocide law. And what she proposed was a change to the Rome Statute, so that you would have a crime of ecocide alongside genocide and war crimes. And that's, you know, a matter that would be addressed at the International Criminal Court. When I got involved in this in 2021, it was just before COP26 in Glasgow, and then during COP26 I met with parliamentarians from around the world, campaigners, including Indigenous people, and it struck me that what we really had to do is continue to push for international criminalisation, but also have that domestic legislation, and that also allows individual countries to show that leadership in their own nations. But now we can see that we have ecocide law happening across the EU and other parts of Europe as well. There's a number of countries in the global south, including Mexico, Brazil and Peru, I think. So we don't want Scotland and I guess the UK to look like we're a bit of a soft touch. So I think and I know the Scottish Government has a policy to align with the EU, but I think everything is kind of fallen into place, that really the time has come for this. In a way, it feels like it's coming home to Scotland, because Polly Higgins from Scotland, it was her idea in the first place.
You mentioned Theresa's FMQs. I thought the First Minister's answer was quite positive.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, I'm always a glass half full kind of person. I know, and FMQs, it was a bit bad-tempered.
Yes.
And I was starting to get quite nervous, because there'd been some early discussion about climate plans and net zero, and everything's too hard, too expensive, so let's not bother. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what Russell Findlay was getting at. And I wonder why, but it's just, it's depressing, and it's not responsible. And I've always taken the view that the climate crisis is real, the nature crisis is real. We have a real problem across the world with pollution. It has a huge impact on people's health. All of these things, of course, harm the environment, but it's really bad for the economy, and it's not good for taxpayers as well. So I just feel that Russell Findlay and other politicians, I hope, maybe just take a pause on this and think through what they're saying. Because if we're really saying, let's stop what we're doing and not bother to reduce emissions and kind of a climate proof, then we just kick the problem down the road and it becomes more expensive to fix. And I listen to constituents of mine in Central Scotland who struggle to get home insurance or business insurance because they've had flood events, there's been storm damage, car insurance more expensive. And this week, when I put out a call to many of the Bill supporters to say, would you like to sign an open letter? It was really good to see some trade unions on there. I mentioned SEPA earlier on. So Unison Scotland have passed a policy resolution in support of Ecocide law. Their name's on that open letter. They represent workers in SEPA. And ASLEF, who represent train drivers, have also put their name to it. I'm about to have discussions with the FBU, the Fire Brigade Union. We've had wildfires in my region recently, and it's getting harder to contain those fires and deal with that. So there's a lot going on, and we've just got to, as a parliament, come together to be really responsible. So
Monica Lennon speaking to me last week. Right, that's it for this week's Unspun Live. Thanks very much for listening. It's been an odd one. We can say this, we can admit this. It's been odd. It's been a weird week. We'll be back next week when hopefully things will be a little bit less weird. We'll have all the news, results, analysis, and interviews from the Hamilton, Larkhall, and Stonehouse by-election. So please do listen to that. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and bye.